Hi, SAMI students. It's Mr. Matthews. Back here to talk you through some things that I think will help you be really successful when it comes to doing your case studies. So we're going to talk about the impacts of mining and some solutions that can reduce the environmental impacts for those communities. So one of the first impacts of mining that we're going to talk about is subsidence. So this happens when the area beneath something kind of starts to break apart, either because it was mined underneath. You can see in the picture kind of what would happen if your house was above it. But this is because the coal or whatever is down there, it could be gold, whatever rock has been mined away. And then over time, it just kind of sinks and will break apart, and this can kind of destroy houses above. The other thing that this can also happen in is actually coal mines can catch on fire, and when they catch on fire, this happens, except you'll also see like smoldering fire when the subsidence happens because all the coal seam has been burned through. And those fires are kind of impossible to put out. There's one in Pennsylvania that's been burning for about 50 years now, and they expect it might burn for another like 200. They're not really sure. So let's talk a little bit about water pollution when it comes to impacts from mining. So you can see in this, we have this mining waste here, and this is just groundwater that has been pumped out of the mine so that they can continue mining, because as they dig down deeper and deeper, the mine's filling with groundwater, so they need to pump it out. However, that groundwater has been contaminated because once they started digging, it's mixing with kind of the rock there and it's becoming acidic. It also can have arsenic, sulfuric acid, lead, mercury, a whole bunch of cadmium, a whole bunch of other contaminants that are kind of in the rock will also be in that water, and this can be really damaging to communities, especially communities that are nearby. They're going to have some trouble being able to have clean drinking water, have water that they can like fish out of. Things like that would be really problematic. Okay, the next one we'll be talking about is kind of some health impacts, and this isn't all of them, but this is just kind of an overview of a couple of them on human health. One of the big ones is black lung disease. One of the problems with black lung disease is that really fine particles like coal dust, once they get inside your lungs, you can't get them out. Your body can't get rid of them, and slowly over time, it just fills people's lungs. People who've been working in mines for more than 5 years are going to have this starting to happen. If they stop early enough and they don't mine anymore, they'll still have black lung and it'll make it so they have trouble breathing, but it won't kill them. If they continue, it will eventually fill up their lungs completely and kill them. But before that, they would have a lot of trouble breathing, so it really limits what they can even do. Let's talk a little bit about some other problems with that. Is that you can have exposure to air pollutants, like arsenic from the rocks is getting in the dust in the air, and cadmium, and all of those can have negative health effects as well. Later on, arsenic is a poison, so you can be poisoned. Let's talk a little bit about some of the impacts of fracking. One of the case studies is explicitly about fracking, kind of focuses a lot on Pennsylvania. That's where a lot of fracking is. There's also some in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Oklahoma are some of the other big places for this. So what they're trying to do is they're getting either oil or methane out of shale. Okay, so you can see in the image over here, this is the shale layer. So the shale layer can have different things in it. And one of the main things in the United States is we're the #1 producer of methane gas, which is natural gas, because of this fracking. However, to do the fracking, they have to drill these wells. And when they drill the wells, they're kind of they're using pressurized water, hydraulic fluid they call it, to force the gas out, and then they capture the gas. However, when they're doing that, They can have cracks. They can contaminate the groundwater, and you can see this little house up here. If it had a well, its well is now poisoned with whatever contaminants are coming out of this. And so the water that they're injecting with it also has contaminants. It can have it usually has a lot of salt in it, but salt will make water undrinkable. The other problem is that we have other toxins getting out, and in the end, this can make it so that that people can get cancer from using this water. And the other problem with this is fracking. Let's say some of this gas, the methane, doesn't get captured, the natural gas. It just gets released into the atmosphere. Methane is 20 times as powerful a greenhouse gas than 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So because of that, you're actually going to be adding quite a bit of methane, or quite a bit of greenhouse gases, and that would cause some climate change to happen, and heating of the earth. So let's talk a little bit about one of the big impacts. So if they're doing strip mining or any sort of mining where they're removing the top layers of soil, so this isn't like underground mining, but this would be strip mining or mountaintop removal mining. You're going to have deforestation and total destruction of the habitat above it. And so this can cause a trophic cascade, kind of killing off an entire ecosystem potentially, due to the loss of habitat and food resources. So let's focus now on some solutions. So the first one we're going to talk about is closing and regulating of illegal mines. So in a lot of places outside of the United States, illegal mining is an issue. And one of the big issues with this is that they are releasing a lot of water pollution, like we talked about with the hard rock acid. And then we also have heavy metals like arsenic and mercury getting in, and then just in general, just sediments that make it so that fish can't live in the water. And all of that is happening around communities. As you can see in the picture above, like there are people living near this mine site, and they're using the same water for their water needs. Another problem is that people that are actually mining, let's say if it's an underground mine, they're being exposed to fine particulates that can get stuck in their lungs, causing black lung, like we just talked about, or something similar to that when we're talking about cobalt. Another thing we can talk about is we could just talk about the fact that, as you can see in the picture above, there really aren't any regulations around safety. So the way the mines are built, they're not safe. The way the water is being discharged is not safe. There's no precautions for environmental protection. All of those sorts of things. If you close a mine, you stop that. An illegal mine, you stop that. Or if you just come up with some regulations and an agency that can regulate it, that would be a good start there. One of the big things here is that you're also going to reduce child labor, which is common in illegal mines. Kids are smaller, they'll do more dangerous work and fit in spots that maybe adults can't. And so because of that, children end up doing some of the more dangerous work. And poverty is one of the root causes that causes families and kids to end up doing this kind of work. Let's talk a little bit about so a way to actually kind of prevent some mining would be to increase recycling of metals and electronics. Just in general, there's a link here. I'll post it in the comments. There's a couple of links here about recycling batteries and then recycling just electronic machines. The battery links are from Europe, so they're doing that in Europe. And then the links for the recycling when they use this giant machine is from New York State. So one of the things that this benefits is we don't have to mine more materials. We can just reuse what we have, which is good. Because of that, then we're also going to have a reduction in air and water pollution. And it's a sustainable solution because you have less carbon emissions. It uses 7 times less energy than mining new ore, which is really important when we're talking about climate change and kind of reducing carbon emissions. Another thing that it does is it actually creates jobs. It turns a waste into kind of a job, and people are making new goods out of those actual wastes instead of them sitting in a landfill and creating more pollution. Another thing is that this is an eco-friendly way that limits damage to the environment. They're capturing dust and things like that, not letting it get into the environment, capturing these particles that like lead and things like that, and they're actually not getting out into the environment. Where if they went to a landfill, they would be getting out in the environment potentially. Another thing that we could talk about around this would be some potential issues. Some potential issues is that it can be done in a non-sustainable way, and it can release toxins. There are examples of children kind of burning old computers to try and get the metals out of them in other countries, and that's obviously like releasing a ton of air pollution and a ton of toxins into the environment. But that is an example of recycling that's not really like the recycling we're talking about. In the video, if you watch it, they have like a fairly expensive machine that sorts the parts and can pull out things that are ferrous metals, so metals that are magnetic, can separate metals that are like aluminum. It can even pull out gold and things like that. So it's a good example of ways to kind of recycle those electronics and get them back out there. Another thing that we could talk about is just improved legislation and regulations around mining. If you have regulations, you're going to have better safety for miners. It's going to reduce the harm to the environment. There would be a regulation, like an agency that would be responsible for regulating this, protecting communities by regulating how close they can be to a community. So someone couldn't build a fracking well like in your backyard. Can force companies to clean up and restore their sites by law so they don't become a Superfund site. A Superfund site is a site that's so polluted that and the place that polluted it, the company that polluted it, doesn't exist anymore. And so now it's kind of a problem for the community and the government to clean up. Those are really big issues currently in the United States. Another thing to think about would be requiring bonds. So they say like, hey, you need to put down $200 million before you can even start digging. And then this is a cost to essentially fix any environmental damage that you do if there's a big accident, and also restore the entire area back to kind of the way it was, or the best you could do it. Okay. Okay, so let's just talk about a couple of examples from the United States. You can see a before and after picture up here after the restoration is done. So obviously a lot of work went into restoring this and filling it with water. So here are some just examples of mining regulations in the United States. One of the first ones is the Mineral Mining and Processing Affluent Guidelines. So in 1975, they created some regulations around what was allowed to be, what wastewater was allowed to be pumped out of these sites and allowed to go into the environment. And really the goal of this was to limit water pollution and remove heavy metals from the water and acid drainage, kind of minimize that so that it's not getting out in the environment and destroying habitats. Another one is the Solid Waste Disposal Act. So this is regulating the generation of hazardous waste from mines to ensure that they are being disposed of properly and they don't just end up becoming pollution out in the environment. The Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act is another one. This one specifically was targeting coal mining operations and talking about strip mining and mountaintop removal, where you'll have just massive damage to the environment. And this act required the companies to restore them back to some sort of state, original state that they were before, so that they can essentially become the habitat that they were before. The Federal Lands Policy and Management Act is also another one. This one's primarily targeting mining and drilling for oil on federal land and saying like you can't do unnecessary damage and you have to essentially clean up after yourself once you're done, restore it back to what it looked like before. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this one. So this one, investing in the